Burnt to the ground. There's a set of pillars off Old Town Road in Chisago City that open a portal to its past. They proudly stand as a reminder of a unique era in the history of a small lake town just 35 miles north of St. Paul, Minnesota. This is the chronicle of a distinctive resort and the community it grew in. This is the story of the Dahl House Resort. In 1850, before the Civil War, the United States government surveyed and sold the land around what would become Chisago City. The forested land surrounded a beautiful chain of lakes and drew many Swedish farmers, settlers, and East Coast speculators. Originally, Chisago City was born in 1855 on a small strip of land between Chisago and Green Lakes, where Zion Lutheran Church now stands. But 25 years later, when the railroad was built 1 mile north of town, Chisago remapped itself and moved to its present location, thus New Town and Old Town. Over the years, lumber was harvested, fields were planted, fish were caught, stores and businesses opened, public schools were funded, and churches continued as a pillar in this predominantly Swedish area. Chisago Village was growing into a city. And in 1906, the men of the area voted 38-10 to finally incorporate. The railroad was the lifeline of small towns, and the new branch from Wyoming to Taylor's Falls would bring commerce and visitors. Glowing newspaper accounts of the Chisago area promoted lakes teeming with fish, abundant wildlife, and scenic beaches, drawing many visitors from the Twin Cities and beyond. A small hospitality sector began to emerge as resorts and cottages popped up around the lakes. The biggest and best of these was Chisago City's legendary Dahl House, Minnesota's finest summer resort. Founder Frank Dahl, at age 9, emigrated from Sweden with his family in 1868 to join his father and brother in Spring Lake, Minnesota. By the age of 20, he was working as a cook for loggers, saving enough to eventually buy a small boarding hotel, the Central House of Stillwater on Chestnut Street, in 1887. Honest, hardworking, and a good cook, Frank Dahl learned the secret of making guests happy. The next year, he married Ida Ledeen of Spring Lake, who had worked in a wealthy White Bear Lake home and had acquired elements of taste and style. Eventually, they bought a lovely tract of land on the northwest shore of Chisago Lake to build the resort of their dreams, to be named the Dahl House. Opening in 1891, the new 20-acre resort was located east of Old Town Road, just 4 blocks south of the train depot. Guests would be picked up by the Dahl House Surrey and enter the resort through their signature pillared gates. Frank Dahl was a good host and interested in the welfare of his guests. As guests checked in the main hotel lobby, the atmosphere and craftsmanship were stylish yet comfortable. One could stay at the main hotel with its spacious, fine dining room that also served for weddings, meetings, and community events, or rent one of the 23 cabins scattered among the trees. Some guests would check in and stay the entire season. The large annex building next to the hotel housed the Dahl family, staff members, and special long-term guests. Frank and Ida Dahl lived on site with their 2 children, Lily Maria, born 1891, and Ruth Irene, born 1903. Their firstborn daughter, Esther Eleonora, had died at age 4 months in 1890, just before they moved from Stillwater. The big draw of the Dahl House was beautiful Chisago Lake, known earlier as Big Lake or Swede Lake. In these early days, there were no Lindstrom or Center Lakes, just one big Chisago Lake, with miles of shoreline surrounded by hardwoods, dotted with islands, It was magnificent. And the Dahl Resort had a great location. It was a quick dash to the popular beach, where guests could swim, boat, fish, or just look stylish. As the years progressed, they added on, grew in reputation, and became the social center for Chisago City. Open from May to September, like other resorts on the lakes nearby, the Dahls had some competition. One was August Schlemmer, a German immigrant who bought an island in the south end of Chisago Lake in 1892 and developed his own resort. Guests would arrive at the Russell Beach train stop, walk down the hill to the dock, and be ferried by the resort launch to the island. In addition to his hotel, 2 cottages, barn, and boathouse, Schlemmer's resort maintained gardens and a fruit orchard. Other competition included Gustafson's on Green Lake, the Peninsula Hotel on South Lindstrom, and the Park Island Hotel on Center Lake. Frank Dahl was an important part of Chisago City society. He served as village and city mayor, bank president, and even directed the Chisago City Band. He eventually built a home north of the annex, where his family first lived. He loved to camp and hunt with his double-barreled Ithaca shotgun. He would often crow, "When this Ithaca barks, something falls." Now, in the early 1900s, America was growing rapidly and becoming more mobile. The Wright brothers opened up the skies for aviation. Model T Fords went into production, and automobiles started replacing the horse. But the public still depended mainly on trains to move people and products. Fortunately, local train service expanded and improved. Chisago City Station was upgraded in 1902, and eventually 3 trains a day would come and go on this rail spur between the cities and Taylor's Falls. Staying at the Dahl Resort became ever more convenient and fashionable. Their well-trained staff and high standards would draw high society types from the cities, like the Washburns and Crosbys, the Hams and the Hills, and even a few jokers like Pickle Schultz from 57 Varieties. In the spring of 1909, the same year as telephone service came to Chisago City, a fire burned down the Dahl main hotel, leaving only the chimney standing. The cabins and annex building were untouched, so while Frank and Ida Dahl did some limited business that summer, local contractor Oscar Johnson was hired to rebuild the hotel. The new replacement hotel would be bigger and better and built at an amazing pace. The Dahl House reopened the next spring of 1910 with a new 35-room hotel and enjoyed renewed success with a busy season. They threw a memorable thank you dinner at the end of that season for some 100 locals who had supported them through their ordeal. With a few well-chosen words, Mr. Dahl greeted the guests, and a fine 7-course dinner was served in the spacious dining room. Short addresses of congratulations were given by Mr. J. E. Vanstrom and Reverend C. E. Slatt. After the repast, Miss Lily Dahl gave a few musical selections on the piano in her exquisite and masterly way, and there was a good deal of fine singing by Mr. Schoberg, a ladies' chorus, and a male quartet. It was a most pleasant social gathering, and Mr. and Mrs. Dahl deserved in full measure the gratitude of all their guests. 1910 also saw more competition. C.G. and Christina Nelson opened the Squirrel Beach Resort near Russell Beach, and the Rylanders set up their housekeeping cabins. Here's a look at some of the resort fun in those days. By the end of the decade, after a world war, flu pandemic, and 29 years in the business, Frank Dahl sold his resort in 1920 for $40,000. His health was declining, but he wasn't one to sit around. In 1923, Frank opened a small, simple group of cabins on Kings Bluff called the Tourist Camp, where Paradise Park is today. His daughter Lily had gone on to the prestigious Juilliard School of Music out east, returning to marry and teach piano, while Ruth attended Carleton College and the University of Minnesota, eventually returning to teach school and marry a World War I veteran. Frank Dahl lost his battle with diabetes and died a few years later in 1927, and his widow Ida remained in their home for a few years before moving away. Frank Dahl may be gone, but the legacy of the Dahl House continued to grow. The new owners were a consortium of investors that included 3 local businessmen and 17 other partners from the Twin Cities. Their enthusiasm and financial clout would capture the spirit of the 1920s and usher in a new era for the legendary Dahl House Resort. They hired a first-rate manager from the Town and Country Club in St. Paul, Thor Follestad, who had big ideas for growth. He would expand the dining room, build tennis courts, playgrounds, and even a giant toboggan slide into the lake. The new owners co-sponsored a 6-hole golf course with the city, complete with oiled sand greens. You could dig for buried golf balls today in the same land under the Point Pleasant townhomes. Over Memorial Day weekend in 1921, the Dahl House had 350 guests with over 1,800 meals served in the dining room. Parking was congested, and overflow guests were even put up in nearby private homes. Some call this period in the early 20s the heyday of the Dahl House. Follestad moved on 3 years later, followed by a few other managers, until one of the investors, Albert Johnson, took over and brought the resort to new heights with his adventurous style of management. Johnson's wife imported 3 rock gardens from the Twin Cities, in addition to other landscape and gardening touches. Guests could rent horses off campus, play croquet, tennis, horseshoes, or practice archery. They could bowl in a small lakeside bowling alley, or waltz above it on a Lakeview dance floor. Parents could relax while their children had daycare programs, activities, a playground. One could listen to the radio, watch movies, play pinochle, visit the soda fountain, or just lie in a hammock reading a magazine. They could delight in the perfect beach, take a cedar boat out, catch huge walleye and northern pike, or shoot down the toboggan slide into the lake. But most important of all, they could savor the fine dining at the hotel. Why, one could enjoy Lake Superior trout, dessert, and all the trimmings for 85 cents. You can see why the Dahl House was highly regarded as a regional destination for summer fun. The real genius of the Albert Johnson era was the island dance pavilion he built. The lake started receding in the 1920s, and lowering water revealed an emerging island offshore. In 1926, they dredged a channel between the shore and island, constructed better docks, and eventually built a unique dance pavilion. This Dahl House Island Pavilion became quite a draw each summer as big-name bands from the Midwest were booked 3 nights a week. Guests and local townfolk would arrive by boat or walk out on a long boardwalk, dressed in style for an evening of dancing, adventure, and romance. Local resident Ted Norelius recalled that 190-proof moonshine was hidden outside in the bushes to spike the Prohibition-era near beer into something a little more festive. This summer hall would be long remembered for wedding receptions, plays, conventions, meetings, all in a beautiful windswept setting on an island in Chisago Lake. Well, the Roaring '20s and the heyday of the Dahl House finally gave way to the '30s, with its depression, unemployment, and worst of all, falling lake levels. Albert Johnson did his best to keep the business successful, but a series of dry years left the resort with muddy shores, little water, and a desperate scramble to attract customers. By the late '30s, with no lakeshore, it was time to close up shop. At the end of the decade, the lake started trickling back, but the growing war effort and gas rationing sealed its fate, and the Dahl House, Minnesota's finest summer resort, closed permanently sometime around 1940. The history is sketchy in these final days. An auction in 1943 sold off the furnishings and some of the cabin property, and the hotel was mothballed while awaiting its fate. In 1948, a proposal was made to convert the Dahl House Hotel into a much-needed hospital, but the state of Minnesota wouldn't allow it. Sometime in the 1950s, Otto Kleinden of White Bear acquired ownership and started remodeling the large former hotel into apartments. Then on Sunday, February 26, 1959, sometime around 7 p.m., a huge fire started, quickly reduced the wooden building to ashes in less than half an hour. The towering flames lit the sky so high that ice fishermen on nearby lakes thought the entire city was going up. A crowd estimated near 1,000 quickly arrived to watch the final demise of this legendary summer resort that evoked so many memories of a glorious era in Chisago City's history. This time, the Dahl House would not be rebuilt. Left behind were some of the cottages, which were sold off, some of which remain to this day. An apartment complex was built in the late 60s on the site of the burnt-out hotel, and the annex building, which was purchased in 1948 by Bart and Helen Lundquist, was eventually renovated by their grandson Dahl Kohlberg. The famous Pillar Gate on Old Town Road stands as a relic of this bygone institution. In 2005, the Chisago City Heritage Association began efforts to restore the Dahl House Gate. Donna Kohlberg, Chuck Gramling, and Marilyn Mays collaborated in bringing together the team to rebuild this decaying structure. First, they obtained a small easement around the pillars from property owners Dale and Brandy Kohlberg to the north, and Larry and Barbara Lundberg to the south. They found Chuck Lifgren, a man of many talents, to do the wood, stone, and brickwork. Linda Letourneau would recreate the stained glass sign. Bill Mack would landscape. And Sogard Electric of Lindstrom would do the wiring. The story of the Dahl House Resort is but one of many that shaped the Chisago Lakes area and this fine community. If you know of any old photos, artifacts, or people willing to share their memories to expand our local history, please contact the Chisago City Heritage Association at the address below. Thank you.